Over 170 years ago, Henry David Thoreau observed, "The mass of men lead lives of quiet desperation." Is this you? Do you feel trapped in the rat race we call life? Are you truly the person you desire to be? Are you unhappy with where you find yourself physically, mentally, or spiritually? Let's make the life changes necessary to empower you with happiness and contentment, belief and confidence in yourself. Join the discussion with countless other people who want nothing more than to be the best version of themselves that they can be. Welcome to Better with Jimmy Blackman. Hello, folks. Welcome to Better. I'm Jimmy Blackman, your host, and I'm excited about today. Not only just to catch up with an old friend of over 25 years now. I was doing a little bit of math, but to introduce all of you to him, and that's Liam Collins. Liam, welcome to the show.
Yeah, Jimmy, thanks for having me. And I thought your math was going to be off too, but I'm like, no, I think it's been 25.
Still a product of Georgia public education, so keep a calculator in your pocket. Well, let me just start by going through a list of things that this underachiever has accomplished, and then we'll dive into some of these after I throw a few out there. Liam is a graduate of the United States Military Academy at West Point. Was an athlete, but walked on the cross country and track team at West Point. I want to talk a bit about that in a minute. And then went into the Army as an engineer officer, assessed for Special Forces, the branch, and went through the Q course, became Special Forces qualified, went to 10th Group, where came to Germany, and I'll tell about our first meeting over there, a funny story here in just a minute. Spent time there in Europe, in 10th Group, and then decided to assess for SFOD Delta or Delta Force. Did that, spent quite a few years there, all over the world with that organization. And then Liam decided to go back to school, went and got a PhD from Princeton, wound up going back to West Point, stood up our counterterrorism center there. The guy who started that entire program, and we can talk about that some. But along the way, Liam did some other things. He is and correct me on my numbers, I'm pretty good with remembering, but 222 marathon personal best, and that's at Boston, by the way.
It was Huntsville, Alabama, 223.
Oh, okay, Rocket City?
Yep, Rocket City, 223.
Okay, so 222, and then won the best ranger competition, but didn't just win it. He won it at 36 years old. And it was funny because Liam had done it a couple of times. You were second there before.
Like a third, a fourth, and a fifth before.
Third, a fourth,
yeah,
and
three top fives. Yeah.
Okay. And so I don't think there's anyone out there that could say they had that many top five finishes there. But I remember being on a forum, all the Ranger community is talking about who's competing in the teams. And I was just eavesdropping on this forum, watching all the comments and everything. And they kept talking about, yeah, Liam Collins is back. You know, man, he's got a lot of tribe, but that old guy. And they kept talking about how ancient he was at 36. And the old guy at 36 won the best Ranger competition that year. And then later on, wound up being on the Ultimate Warrior. I watched him on television, which was pretty cool, at 46 years old, and running around with a bunch of young folks, doing some really physically demanding things. So we'll talk a bit about that as well as we go. But Liam, I want to dive in just this idea of believing in yourself and discipline. It had to take some self-belief and lack of doubt just to walk on the team at West Point. What were your thoughts going into that?
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, maybe I was too dumb to know how dumb I was or something at the time, but to me, it wasn't, I don't think I really truly understood how hard it is to make a Division I athletic team. I mean, and we had a good team there at the academy. 2 years after I left, we finished sixth in the nation. So we were a good team, and I was surrounded by All-Americans. And but I just, the coach said you had to basically run a 440 mile down on the indoor track in the heat of the summer with our issued military issued running shoes in the middle of our cadet basic training. And my high school best was 433, so barely faster than that. And so that's what it took. And so that's what I was going to do. And so I did it. And out of 11 recruits and walk-ons that made the team as a freshman, I made varsity freshman year. And by senior year was the only one left in the team captain.
Awesome. And team captain, not because you were the fastest guy on the team.
No, I mean, well, we had some All-Americans that were really good. So yeah, there was no way I was ever going to be at their level. I
So
could
it
just
was because of your
I could
leadership.
outwork or out hustle them, but they were always going to be faster.
Yeah. But the leadership that you showed, and then I did some consulting work with a national hockey league team, and of course, I'm from Georgia. Stuff don't freeze in Georgia, so I knew nothing about hockey, but it was about the team. It was interesting. We took them to Fort Bragg, and put them through some incredibly challenging physical stuff and some problem solving, and they all deferred to this one kid, and he was one of the least paid on the team, barely made the pro squad, but a pro hockey player. But I remember looking at the coach saying, "There's your team captain right there." He goes, "What do you mean?" He equated it to how much they paid and how many goals they scored. I said, "No, no, everyone defers to that guy right there. They go to him for everything, and that's your captain." And so clearly you were, you had that leadership and the respect of the team. It didn't matter what the times necessarily were for that. But then off to engineer. Was that your choice, your first choice to engineer branch?
Yeah, I mean, I wanted to be an engineer when I was a cadet at the academy. Two of my best professors came from this one engineer battalion in the 82nd Airborne, and I had been to the Army Sapper School, which is kind of like a ranger school with demolitions for engineers. And I said, that looks pretty cool. I want to do that if I want to be the best, because that's where I'm going to have to go, is go to be an engineer in the 82nd Airborne Division.
Okay. So what led to what took you to SF?
Yeah, I mean, at Special Forces at that time, I mean, we're talking back in the early 90s. There wasn't all these video games and internet and everything else. So really what only exposed to it because it was a home of Special Forces, and kind of looked at what I would do as an engineer if I stayed in the Army and what I would do as Special Forces. And the appeal of Special Forces was a couple. I mean, one, they're always doing real world operations, whether you're at war or not. And the other piece, right, the other part of it was you're working on a really small, talented team of 12 individuals, counting yourself, and kind of a challenge like that, and kind of, as opposed to being a company commander in a conventional unit where you have 120 soldiers and you're clearly, in charge of them. You're the captain. And in a Special Forces detachment, I mean, I showed up in Germany, and every single person on my detachment had more time in Special Forces than I had in the Army, and I'm in charge of them. So you can imagine the challenge of that. But I've always been one of those people where I want to be the slowest one on the team or the dumbest person in the room, and that's how I'm going to be better. And I, that's what I always like to be on those kind of teams.
Right. So coming to Germany, let me tell the story quickly of us first meeting. Liam and I knew each other through a mutual friend, Mike Bernstein, who ran on that team at West Point. I had trained the previous year to me going to Germany with Mike. And of course, Liam was a teammate with Mike at West Point. And so I'd gone to the European Armed Forces Track and Field Championships. I was running the 5,000 there, and Mike had told me, "Hey, Liam's going to be there. Look for him." So Liam shows up, and of course, mutual friend, small community. We hit it off immediately, and Liam had just moved there, and in fact, his household goods had not even showed up. So he shows up at the European Armed Forces Track and Field Championships and says, "Hey, Jimmy, do you have a pair of racing flats I can borrow?" And I said, "Really? Yeah, I need some shoes to race in." And so I said, "Yeah, I happen to have two pair of flats, the ones that I had raced in the 5,000. I had a pair of spikes, and then I had another pair of racing shoes. And I was running for Brooks at the time. So I'm like, I hope you like Brooks." And so Liam went through my bag, tried on a couple of pair, picked one. and he won the 10,000 that day, wire to wire, led from gun to gun, all the way around in borrowed shoes. And that's kind of the Liam Collins of that did the 440 mile in the indoor basement. Hey, don't tell me I can't do something, and I don't have to have optimal conditions to do it. In fact, you had surgery prior to that, if I recall, not very long.
Yeah, I mean, it wasn't surgery, but I had finished the Special Forces qualification course probably about a little less than 2 months prior. And for the 6 months qualification course, I had been hurt. So I had basically not run a step in 6 months and picked up 45 to 60 days before the championship. Got over there. I don't think I'd even signed into the new unit yet. And stayed with another mutual friend of us, Carl Clark, who was in my battalion. And he said, "Hey, there's a championship this weekend." And I said, "I'm not in any shape to run this thing, but I guess I'll go." And the first day, I think I ran the 5,000 meter, and then had no desire to run the 10,000. I was definitely not in shape to do it. And then another, team, what would end up being a teammate of Jimmy, yours and mine, and who he lovingly called Stinky. He had said something. We were in the bathroom or something after the 5K, and he asked if I was running the 10K the next day, because he's like, hopefully you won't run because I want to win something. And that's kind of all it took. And I said, well, I don't even know if I can finish this thing, but I'm sure the heck going to run it now.
I think you ran 32.0 something that day.
Yeah, I don't know how you would even remember that. I had to look it
Yeah.
up, and it was 32:08, which I don't know how you could possibly remember that.
I don't know what it is. They stick around for some reason, but yeah. So that that grit, determination. Do you think you were born with that? Was that influence with your upbringing? What do you think?
I have no idea. I just know. I think it's probably like it's part nature, part nurture, or something. You probably have a certain amount of innate ability to do it, but you can definitely develop it. And I think part of it is by always putting yourself in challenging situations. Like I said, I don't want to be the top runner on a crappy team. That doesn't appeal to me. I'd rather be struggling just to make a really, really good or a great team. I mean, that's or where I feel like I'm the dumbest one in the room. That's kind of, and I think that's how you develop that grit. You go to Ranger schools in the Army, you go to the sapper schools, you go to the best units that have the best people, where it's really hard to stand out. I think those are places where you can develop grit.
Yeah, I agree with you. And we've had a larger conversation in our consultancy about this idea of these hardships. And we're going to have an episode, in fact, on the podcast about the influence, and talk specifically about Ranger School. And I remember being in combat and it really sucking. And I remember saying, well, it ain't as bad as Winter Ranger School. You draw back on those times, those experiences you had. So what effect does that have, on a generation that we protect from those bad, hard days? And some days just really suck, but going through those days gives you a reference for future that you can draw back on. So, those experiences I think are important for us as we navigate life and try to do well. It's funny, in my notes I wrote down here, I think he ran 32:10, but I'm pretty sure it was 32:0 something. So pretty close on the guess there. So next game.
You might have ran the 32:10. You might have been the 2
So
seconds
that's the
behind.
story of my life with Liam Collins. I was always a few seconds behind. And that same mentality, we ran the Army 10 miler together many, many years. And Liam was always a step ahead. He was always right there. I remember one year, I think I ran 53:58 that year. But we were in about 8.5 miles in on 395 coming back over toward the Pentagon. And I saw you and I was closing on you. And I don't know what made you look back. I don't know what it was, but I saw you look, and I assumed, we've never had this discussion, that you saw me, but you sped up and beat me. Of course, there was no catching. And I said, well, I guess it was good that way, because if I would have came up shoulder to shoulder, you would have found something somewhere to make sure that you closed the deal. I was confident of that, because that's just in your nature. I'll kill myself before you're going to beat me. So next came assessing for the unit. And what made you want to do that?
Yeah, I mean, I had, just spent 2 years commanding, special forces detachment in Germany, and actually was accepted to go back and teach physical education at West Point and go to grad school for that. But I kind of, all my, special forces soldiers, I hate telling me, hey, you got to go to the unit, you got to go to the unit. And it was kind of looking, it was, pre 9/11, and if I went to grad school and taught at West Point, I'd kind of be away from troops for a while, kind of in that prime command time. So really for me, it was a way to stay operational and stay at the troop level as long as possible.
And so while you were there, this is going back to this theme of Liam just being that guy. Within the assessment, there's a huge movement, navigation, just unbelievable terrain and distances, but you wind up breaking your leg.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not going to get into the specifics of what
Yeah.
the physical piece of it was, but yeah, I mean, basically, 30 minutes into when it really counted, it just snowed and it was walking on leaves, on rocks, on mud down a hill, and you just kind of with carrying heavy loads, so you just keep kind of picking up pace and until you kind of running down just to keep your balance, and at the bottom hit a ditch, fell down and banged the leg on a rock down there. And I had never broken a bone before, but I got up and I was like, God, I think I broke my leg. This thing kind of hurts. So I was like, well, I had to make this a little harder than it would have otherwise been. So yeah, I just kind of had to keep muscling through on a broken leg. Now, to be fair, it wasn't like bones were sticking out, but I mean, it hurt for sure.
Yeah. But you had a choice, right? It's, well, I'm hurt, walk away,
Yeah, I
or
mean,
I'm going to
yeah, but it
finish
was
it.
like this is a one shot deal. I can't come back in 6 months and do this again. It's a one shot deal. So yeah, I mean, the choice is, do you just quit on it or just keep kind of going through? And so to me, it really wasn't a choice. I was just going to go through until I just couldn't do it, and I kept doing it.
Uh, what about the best rangers? Talk to us a little bit. Tell the listener who really doesn't know what best ranger is, kind of, what it is, how difficult it is, and your approach to that.
Yeah, I mean, so it's a 2.5 day competition. You kind of start Friday morning, you finish Sunday afternoon, and it's a lot of physical stuff. You might have a 20 plus 5 mile road march carrying your heavy backpack or rucksack, as we call it in the military, on your back, which could be 60 to 80 pounds. Or and the next night, you're up all night. The second night, then doing land navigation or orienteering, depending on what you want to call it, running around the woods, trying to find points, shooting events, medical kind of emergency medical kind of thing, combat medicine, um, obstacle courses. And so just kind of one event right after another for 2.5 days, you and a partner doing that together.
What do you think limited you from winning it in those other top five finishes? Did you have a strategy going in when you did win it that made up for areas you knew you needed to work on, or what do you think it was?
No, I mean, I think part of it is, I mean, it's a two-person competition. And so part of it is, what is the strengths and weaknesses of your partner. And so I had solid partners the other years, but I think just not, I mean, it's really competitive people out there. So just kind of, having a partner that's capable of winning it. And I mean, having a partner capable, that you can get to the top five is pretty amazing. So, I mean, I had really solid partners, but it was just, we were up against really tough people the other years. It was tough to do it. And then finally that year, had a really solid partner that, I think allowed us to win it. And one thing, I mean, I tell people the year we won it, a lot of units, they send their people for like 4 or 5 months for the competition. They do nothing but train on that competition. And my partner Walt and I, we were working. I only had 1 year ever where I had dedicated training time to get ready for the competition. So that was probably another reason why I've been hard the other years. And I say, hey, Walt and I trained together for 2 half days to get ready for the competition. And other people were doing nothing but 4 months of training. But I say that's dedicated training. I said, for me, it was, I trained my whole military career for that, right? If you know how to be, technically and tactically proficient, I mean, we beat like Ranger Regiment people at skills that a non-commissioned officer should know. And we beat them on those kind of things. And it's physical fitness. I trained my whole life to be physically fit. And so I don't need special dedicated time to doing that. To me, you can't cram for the test, right? It's a lifetime and a commitment. So I think those were the strengths that we had.
All right. I'm going to share my screen here just a second. And you get a Beretta 9 mil when you win. So that's winning the best Ranger competition. And then, of course,
You
I
might
mean,
see
I
him
got,
right there. You might see him behind my head right there.
yeah, I do see them up there on the top behind you. And then there's 20 years younger, Liam and I in the parking lot of the Pentagon. And finally, then we'll talk about this. Now you got into the Spartan stuff. You got into these multidiscipline type events. How did that transpire?
Yeah, so I mean, probably a longer story. I coached the All Army distance team for a number of years, and one, Fourth of July weekend one year, the head of the Army Sports calls me up and he said, "Hey, I want you to coach the orienteering team at the World Military Championships." And I said, "I've never done orienteering. I don't know what it is. Why are you asking me to coach this?" And he said, "Hey, you've done best ranger, you special forces ranger, you know how to do, land navigation as we call it, which is different from the sport of orienteering, and you're our best coach. So, and it's an endurance thing. Why don't you coach it?" I said, "Hey, I'll find you a coach. I'll go as like cheap a mission." So I found a coach. He couldn't do it. So I ended up coaching and then competing at it. And really, like in the orienteering, we just did it for a couple of years and they didn't have a budget for it. But anyway, so he calls me back and says, "Hey, we're going to send an Army team to the Spartan obstacle course world racing championships." So I pulled the team together and do that and really enjoyed it. And then the next year I said that was just a one race event. And the next year we are going to put together a team and compete in a number of events. And so I said, "Hey, I can find the right guy for this. I can find and train the right guy for this." So the next year pulled another guy, Rob Killian, in to do it. And he ended up being the world champion that year. So it was kind of, I wish they would have had the sport when I was 10 years younger. But yeah, it was just kind of like a different kind of challenge. I really enjoyed, I enjoyed the running, but this was, in, obstacles and everything else. So it's kind of pulled me in, a way to kind of challenge and suffer again.
Yeah. Well, so that sounds like you like the challenge and the suffering as well. What do you think? Just give me your philosophy on that.
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of funny. I mean, actually, the year before I won Best Ranger, I was on staff for 2 years. You're not out in the woods. You're not running around being operational. For someone that likes to do that kind of thing, in some ways, it's mental torture. But I remember one time walking to a meeting or something, and I'm just feeling like, I haven't suffered in a while. I think I need to suffer. Um, but I think you need those challenges, and the Army. I mean, kind of there's always the joke that if it's character is built through suffering or whatever, but that's kind of where you get your memories and the things you remember. You afterwards, you don't totally remember how much it sucked. You just remember how great of a thing that it was. I mean, you definitely remember being cold and losing 30 pounds at Ranger School or something, but kind of those bad memories fade, but it kind of turns you into who you are. So I think that's kind of where it comes from.
Have you ever really had a blip in your life to this point where you just lost motivation and went into a valley, or no?
I mean, yeah, during the first phase of the Special Forces qualification course. So, I had never failed anything in my life, and it was a patrolling thing, and had failed that. I mean, there were, a number of reasons what happened, but so we went in there to kind of get the feedback, and I was the first person to go in there, and we have what and they're like, "Hey, you failed. You're gonna have to repeat it." And I was like, just in complete and utter shock. I just couldn't believe it. It didn't make sense to me. And then when I walked out, and I was the first person in our team to get counseling, and they're like, and I had to hire like peer evals, they call it in some of the Army schools. They do peer evals, and came out as number one on the team. And everybody's like, "If you failed, then none of us will pass. There's no way." Yeah, and luckily a good number of them did move on to the next phase. But I mean, that was tough. And I remember talking to some people after that, and they're like, "Well, it just shows you're human." I'm like, "Well, one, if this is what human is, it sucks. And two, if I wasn't a human before, what was I? Was I a robot or something?" But yeah, I mean, that was painful, but just came back the next time and you know, put the same kind of work and effort into it, again.
Yeah. So I had a similar experience. In fact, I still to this point in my life, I've only a limited number of people know. Now I'm about to broadcast it, but I had finished up flight school and basic course, and I was waiting to go to Ranger school, and I just had some time to kill. And I'd been to airborne school, but I hadn't been to air assault school, and I just went down to air assault school, just showed up and said, "There'll be a drop, something. I'll just jump in air assault school." And so I showed up. Sure enough, I got in. And the first ground portion of that is all academic, and it's about inspecting loads. And they have all these knots, and they will rig all of this equipment to be lifted by a helicopter, and they put errors in it. You got to find all the errors under a time limit. Same thing. I'd never failed a course. I'd never not been at the top. I mean, you and I same DNA in that if I'm going to do this, I'm going to be number one. I guarantee I'm going to be the most fit guy here, unless freaking Liam's in my class. But but I'm gonna, I'm gonna do more push-ups. I'm gonna do more sit-ups. I'm gonna run faster than you. I'm gonna be at the top of the class. And some people could say that maybe is a character flaw, but it's just who I am. And I show up to this thing, I study, I prepare, and we had a 105 millimeter howitzer rigged, and they said go and hit the clock. I knew all the way it was supposed to be rigged and everything, and I couldn't find anything. It was like I was looking and nothing was there, and I failed, and I was out. Week one gone. And I remember it was the most number one was it was just hugely embarrassing as I walked away with my duffel bag over my shoulder. But I remember thinking the same thing. I never want to feel this again. I never want to experience this type of failure again. And I guess in hindsight, it was a good thing because I always over prepared. And I remembered that throughout my career, any other school I went to or anything I did, you don't want to feel that. So over prepare. And it motivated me to study. It motivated me to work harder. And so sometimes those events are anything, they're bitter medicine, anything but fun to go through. But sometimes, hopefully, we come out of them a better person from that. So let's go get a PhD. Talk to me about that.
Yeah, so I mean, normally when the Army sends someone to get a PhD, so they do it kind of a couple ways. A lot of times they'll send someone for 2 years to get a master, and they send them later in their career to 3 years to get a PhD. So about 5 years of school. And so I was going back to West Point, and they were giving me 2 years to get my master's. So I showed up at Princeton the first day and check in at the admin office and get there, and so the admin team is like, Collins, the dean wants to see you, and I said, this doesn't sound, I've never been to grad school before, but this doesn't sound normal. How often does the dean want to see someone on the first day of class? And they're like, well, we've never heard of it before. I'm like, well, can you call her up and see if she's in? I'll go see her right now. So they call upstairs. Like, yep, she's in. You can go up and see her. So I go up there, and she's like, so are you going to do your PhD while you're here? And I said, I got 2 years to do my master's. And she's like, yeah, basically do all your master's work, do all your PhD work, get all but dissertation, as they call it, and then work on your dissertation up at West Point. So I'm thinking, okay, I was a aerospace engineer, so rocket scientist as an undergrad, going to grad school for something totally different. And so I'm going to do all my master's work, overload, do all of this PhD work, and then do a dissertation up, so basically take no free time at grad school, and then go up to West Point, and in the free time I don't have, do my dissertation to get my PhD. And I said, this sounds like a terrible idea. Where do I sign up? So that's kind of the story of that.
Awesome. So what now? Tell us about where you're at, what you're doing.
So I'm living in Wisconsin now. My wife and I are both from here. So we moved back here after I retired from the Army about 3.5 years ago, and where I'm working for a small family foundation. But great thing is keeps me connected with the Army, keeps, and again, to me, the best units in the Army, the Special Operations and Ranger Regiment. And it keep that, and because we run a scholarship program for the Army, it keeps me connected with all the top tier graduate schools. So keeps me engaged kind of on that intellectual side to kind of challenge me over there. So really, enjoying that and helping mentor some of our, up and coming leaders in the Army.
Liam, I meet business leaders all over the world all the time, and I get a common story, especially after they've had that first beer after a work day, and it's usually along the lines, yeah, y they'll bring up my fitness or me working out or me not drinking necessarily or something like that, yeah, man, I've just kind of let myself go, and I really need to lose 30 pounds, and I watch what they eat, and I watch how late they stay up and how much they drink and the lifestyle they're living, and many of them making tons of money, and if you looked at them from outside, you'd think very happy, but in that conversation, I gather not very content. A lot of them not really happy with where they are mentally, physically, spiritually, or all of the above. If you could give any bit of advice to folks in midlife, admittedly in crisis or not, but maybe not happy with where they are and the version of themselves that they're experiencing right now, what would that advice be?
Yeah, I mean, I think maybe they're somewhere along the way they started chasing something instead of kind of just being content with where they're at. Um, you know, I kind of joke, but I'm not joking. Like I never knew what I wanted to do when I grew up, and I still don't know what I want to do when I grow up. But I'm having fun along the way, and so that was kind of the Army experience. Like we've talked about earlier. Like I didn't know what I wanted to do after I was an engineer in the first unit, and then I saw a special force. I said I'll do that, and then I didn't know what I was going to do next, but I did a good job of where I was at, and then I went to the unit, and then I went to Princeton. Right? I never really had a long plan. I just did the best job I could where I was at. Um, and so I think part of it is that, like, I mean, be the best that you can of where you're at instead of constantly chasing something, because you'll get there, right? You'll get on that path to where you may not even know where you want to go, but if you're so focused on trying to the next prize or something, I think you're going to be unhappy. And I think it's in part of that. I mean, we typically, I mean, this isn't kind of the podcast you may talk about it, but I look at some of the most successful, I guess you'd call them role models or people that I know. And you talk about people like General Stanley McChrystal, General Tony Thomas, and these are guys that spent, years of life deployed. And you talk about how challenging it is, but these guys have been married for 40 years, right? That was a priority for them, right? Those things they never sacrificed that. And those are the things that have kept them happy and kept them grounded. So, I guess for, those people that you're talking to, like they can't lose sight of what's important to them, right? The friends and the family, like those have to always be a focus, because if that's not going to go well, they're not going to be happy no matter how much money or anything else is going on. And so kind of being smart about that trade-off. And that doesn't mean you're not committed to your work or anything else, but you have to be just as committed to the family and to yourself. And so it's kind of finding that right balance. And I don't think it's necessarily like a trade-off, but finding balance is probably a better way to better term to use.
Yeah. Yeah, I have guys when I do executive coaching tell me what their professional and personal priorities are and have them write them down. And then I have them track their time. And have those things don't always line up. I tell you, where you spend your money and your time, that's your priorities. And if it isn't at home, should you be surprised if that is not in good rapport, not where you want it to be? Well, Liam, I can't thank you enough for catching up. I appreciate the time you've spent with me today. I appreciate your friendship. We're working on 3 decades now, and I still mentally am just as young as the first days we ran together. It's just my body doesn't agree. It doesn't want to keep up. But I appreciate you coming on the show and wish you the best.
All right. Thanks for having me, Jimmy.
Thanks.
Grows and a hero passes by, another one's gone to the other side.